So you're still optimistic that these changes could happen
Well, in a
in
sense,
time? Because I've heard a fact, I think it was the United Nations said we only have about 60 harvests left, or there's some version of that quote. Where how many harvests do we have left if we continue with current practices?
well, no one knows.
No one knows, but it's obviously
It's arbitrary.
a one figure trying to encapsulate the whole world food production. But the point is that if we carry on as we are, soil will be depleted to the point that we won't be able to have food, and then there could be serious food crises even, and then we'll see some serious wars, etc., displacement of peoples, all that stuff coming in.
So, I mean, we're only ever 7 meals away from out-and-out revolution.
Yeah.
And if you look at the global food supply chain, and if you look at a kind of global map, there are 5 main points around the world where 90% of the world's commodity food travels through. And a lot of those areas are affected by issue, whether it's the Panama Canal shutting because the water's got too shallow, whether it's the issues around the Middle East stopping the Suez, whether it's any of the Black Sea, whether it's the Singaporean Straits. So from a global supply chain, it's this just-in-time-ness is very brittle, and that's beginning to be recognised. So the kind of onshoring of supply chains is something that's going to be exciting, and Simon and I, it's one of the many tailwinds that plays into the reason that we're doing this. But I think in terms of the legs of the regenerative food movement, and when we say regenerative food, we mean transitioning the entire farm to flush supply chain to be able to allow for maximum soil building and nutritious whole food to the end consumer, but done with a view that we are building soil to create small and large water cycles. We are creating habitat and biodiversity, and at the same time producing healthy food. Now, that's our top line. The reality of what we're actually seeing is there is a deluge of founder that has come in to fill these new scientific understanding points. So whether that's on farm and our understanding of how soil functions, or the data that needs to flow from farm to either the consumer or to the founder to be able to then monitor and improve, or whether it's understanding around supply chains and how to make those far more efficient. Often a supply chain has been referred to as a missing middle and not necessarily tampered with for decades. The wheat supply chain in America or the UK would be a good example that Wildfarmed are looking at. Or whether it's on the consumer end in terms of understanding what health actually looks like, which is a fairly blunt instrument at the moment, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. An example might be, no one could have predicted how quickly the adoption of alternative milks would have come into play.
Sure.
And as we're now beginning to see, some of the share prices don't necessarily reflect the health issues. So on the one hand, they may be able to claim a lower carbon footprint, which I think is probably debatable versus livestock that have been reared regeneratively, but certainly versus industrialized dairy is one of their big selling points, that they have less of a carbon footprint. But what they haven't been necessarily discussing as much as they should is the glycemic load and index of an oat milk product, which essentially produces a carbohydrate that turns into a sugar that enters your bloodstream much quicker, often than raw cane sugar. And
the same
oats,
insulin response as Coca-Cola, apparently.
Really? What, from say Oatly oat milk?
I mean, without naming the brands, but
okay.
yeah.
So,
I think you're right. And
because they have also oils and things in it like that aren't supposed to.
Seed oils,
industrial seed oils.
Is that great for you?
Yeah.
Which to go back to Chris's point around nutritional profiling, there is a lot of epidemiological research that fats that are high in omega-6 relative to omega-3 trigger an inflammatory response and are linked to many chronic long-term health conditions. If you walk down the middle of the supermarket, I'm not just bashing at the alternative milks, but most things that we consume, the biscuits, the crisps, the cereals, all of the ultra-processed foods, they tend to be the three devils the three horsemen of the apocalypse: seed oils, flours, ultra refined flours, and ultra refined sugars.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why because I'm vegan and I don't have any dairy, so I was quite happy to see all these nut milks and etc. coming out, but then also realized that they're not the healthiest. So now I just have a little nut milk machine at home that kind of make it fresh normally.
Nice.
You can just put in different types of nuts, and I've tried all different types actually, like even things like pistachio nut milk.
Nice.
Alternative ones that aren't like mainstream pecan nuts, and they all have different flavors, and they all act as milk, and still you can add them to coffee or whatever cereals, etc. So that could be, I mean, maybe that's a solution instead of, because obviously companies like Oatly must add those extras to allow it to be transported, etc., and stored. Is that why? Or obviously
and mouthfeel.
And mouthfeel, the creaminess, etc.
The creaminess comes from the fat.
Right.
There's the only other issue with them is if it's oat milk, particularly. Oats are you often spray your oat crop with glyphosate at the very end of its life before harvest to dry it out, and that's when it's obviously at its most porous, and it retains a higher percentage of glyphosate, let's say, than some other crops. So there's a higher percentage of glyphosate that then ends up in the finished product, and glyphosate is a neuroinhibitor and essentially an anti-bacterial.